Coming up next, we're going to talk to somebody who walked away from the sport mid-cycle in order to regain her integrity. This is a story about perseverance and the detrimental health impacts of PED use and what it takes to regain yourself. This is a story you're not going to want to miss. In a world of enhanced physiques and social media smoke and mirrors, where do you find the truth? Welcome to the OCB Natural Edge Podcast, the official voice of the world's largest drug-free bodybuilding federation. From the science of the shred to the grit of the stage, no secrets, no substances, just the edge. Hello and welcome to the OCB Natural Edge. Hey, today I have a very, very special guest. I have a competitor who is showing the heart and the bravery of what it takes to turn a corner. Her name is Cristen Hughes, and she is a former PED using competitor who wanted to open up about her use, her coming off, and the true aspects of the PED uses in the sport. I just wanted to thank you again, Cristen. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you and your bravery of coming on and talking about this topic.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, I want to begin with your bio, and I think it's best if I actually read your accomplishments and who you are for our audience. So Cristen Hughes is a longtime competitive bodybuilder, coach, and practitioner with decades of experience in physique sport, training, and athlete development. She entered bodybuilding driven by discipline, excellence, and respect for the craft, rising through the competitive ranks during a time when extreme physiques were increasingly rewarded and normalized. As her career progressed, witnessed and personally experienced the shift in commercial competitive bodybuilding towards escalating enhancement, short-term success, and the decisions that often came at the expense of long-term health. Like in many athletes of her era, she entered that system with limited education and naive trust in what was presented as normal for winning, only later understanding the true psychological and personal cost. Today, Cristen speaks from lived experience rather than judgment, having stepped away from that vision of the sport. She has undergone a personal restoration, redefining bodybuilding not as self-sacrifice for trophies, but as stewardship of physique, longevity, and integrity. Her current work centers on education, accountability, and helping athletes pursue excellence without compromising their future. Thank you. I can tell that you are truly dedicated in the education of what PEDs actually do to the human body. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I want to start right from the beginning. What was your entry point into the world of PED use? Where did you first find out about it and how did you first get involved in that part of the sport?
Well, when I would say 19, I went to GNC and I had been doing weightlifting. I had really been working out and I would loved reading Muscle and Fitness magazine and seeing all of the competitors. And so I went in and I was like naively, hey, I just want to put some muscle mass on. And my initial conversation was just, this is just a supplement that helps you put muscle mass on. I had no idea that it was a banned substance. It was called 1AD, and I took it, and I did. I gained 10 pounds of mass. My strength went up. My bench press went up. And I was so excited at the gains that I got that so PEDs came straight out of the gate. And then later on, that ended up being what Mark McGuire tested positive for. And I didn't realize that that was a derivative of testosterone, which knocked me out of the ability to compete naturally. And so when I decided to go into competing, there wasn't an option to go into a natural organization because you needed to be 7 years clean. And so I went into, to the NPC because that wasn't drug tested. I did compete naturally at first, my very first show, and then I decided I needed a coach, and PEDs were introduced immediately.
So there was
So it was
no training you naturally initially, it was just right into the PED use?
straight in. So when I started working out, obviously I didn't use PEDs, but whenever I went to GNC and immediately saw those gains, and then I went and hired a coach because, okay, so this is the steps. You're going to hire a coach, you're going to compete. right? It was introduced immediately. There wasn't even it was just, this is what is normal, this is what you do, and this is how you do it, and this is how you get it. And that was it.
In your experience and from talking to other competitors, is that commonplace with competitors? In other words, is that the
I
norm
believe
or was
so.
that unusual?
So I will say this to be fair to all coaches. I don't think necessarily that all coaches push steroids, but I will say that I have never hired a coach that was a pro coach to get me ready for a show when PEDs were not just part of the program. It was a normal part of the programming. Here's your program, here's your nutrition, and here's the drugs that I need you to get right out of the gate.
What was
That
the
was just what
expense? What was the expense? Was it very costly?
astronomical.
Yeah.
So I would say my very first use, my very first season of use, I spent over $4,000 just on the drugs
Mm.
in that first year, just right out of the gate. And that was before introducing much more expensive drugs like human growth hormone and things like that. Right out of the gate, it was just a crazy expense. Um, as I shared with you before, I went and I met a pro coach. And this is part of being a female in the sport that I think is not talked about, and I'm going to talk about it. Is very first pro coach, he was a male. I walked into the gym, walked straight into his office. Very professional at first, like looked the part. He was definitely shredded from head to toe, trophies everywhere. So I was like, I'm in the right spot. The first thing he did was close the blinds, ask me to disrobe, and he tried to kiss me. And that's when I realized that there was definitely a deeper um, understanding that I was not privy to, where females could come into the mix and come into the fold, but there was expectations that were going to be there because steroids are illegal. And in order to get illegal drugs, there are certain things that are going to be required of you or asked of you. And that was just, now I'm not saying that's everyone's circumstance. I'm not saying that that's everyone's experience, but I am saying that that was my experience. That's what
It
happened. I
it
immediately fired him and tried to hire a female coach. And working with female coaches was just as disconcerting because their mental state was all over the place because they were on such high levels of drugs. So my experience across the board had drugs from the start, and there was immediately a sense of fear, and there was immediately a sense of, I guess I'm gonna have to make a hard decision that this is what I have to do to compete.
And have you talked to other female competitors that also had a similar experience with coaches? I mean, that entire culture.
Absolutely. Especially I'm from rural Georgia, and so
Mhm.
there's not a huge amount of coaches in these areas. Obviously, there's much better coaches in larger areas that have a greater reputation and things like that. You don't have a face-to-face, coach experience in rural South Georgia, right? And so typically what you have is a low-level person who's never turned pro that's peddling steroids inside local gyms, that's getting a following of females, and the first thing that they do is hot them up on T3. For those of you who do not know, that's a thyroid medication that affects your heart and causes tachycardia. Clenbuterol, which is a bronchodilator that also affects your heart and can cause massive issues with tachycardia and with AFib. That's typically the first go-to, for fat loss because most girls want to do bikini. And then, God forbid, you want to do any bigger, go into the bigger categories like figure or women's physique or even bodybuilding, because now they're going to peddle you Anavar, Winstrol, Masteron. and so on and so forth. And then the side effects and the damage to your physiology is so overwhelming out of the gate that most of these people out of their first show or second show already have destroyed their endocrine system and have
And that
permanent damage when it comes to metabolism.
and that was the question, and my next question I wanted to ask you. So, where was the tipping point for you about how far along from the time that you began using until you started noticing a side effect? Like, what was that tipping point for you?
Sure. So, my very first cycle, my voice began to drop very noticeably. I began experience clitoral hypertrophy by the time I did my second show. Vaginal changes like constant urinary tract infections, um, hair growth on my face. That's a big one. I have to shave my face every day, and I have from the start. Have had to do that. For those of you who think, oh, well, I'll just get electrolysis. Electrolysis does not work when you're on androgens. If you're on consistent androgens throughout the year, androgenic hair growth cannot be taken away with just the use of electrolysis. So I have to shave my face like a man every day of my life
And these are the
to this day.
masculinizing effects. Yeah, these are all the masculizing effects that are almost never talked about, but you experienced them from the onslaught. Now, are you still have any of them dissipated, or have you found them to be fairly permanent?
No, so they actually progressed, throughout so I've been doing this 16 years, and the progression of especially when I introduced anastrozole, which is an anti-estrogen, it began to eat the fat in my face. So as I would get lean, the fat along the borders of my cheekbones and things like that would disappear. You could actually see my masseter in my jaw.
Oh.
So I've gone and had filler put in my cheeks to restore the shape of my face because I have an older brother. I actually started to favor my older brother. We started to look almost identical because of the masculinizing effects. And so I had filler put in to fix my face and give me cheeks back because all of the fat had left my face. My jawline spread a good bit. My face used to be much rounder and fuller in my cheeks. So there was things that I experienced right out of the gate, and I was like, okay, well, I'll go see an aesthetics person and just have more stuff shot in my face, right? And so it's a constant. Now you don't just have the cost of drugs, now you have the cost of trying to cover up what you've ruined.
And our other female competitors that are still competing doing the same thing? Is that did you learn that through the
Absolutely.
industry?
Honestly, most of my friends that compete, every single one of them use Botox, fillers, lip injections, hair extensions because our hair begins to fall out and get thin. I still wear hair extensions to this day because of the thinning. I have a receding hairline because of the use of, it started to cause like that patterned baldness in my hair. So I mean, and this has been 16 years of steady use and 16 years of steady progression of viralization, um, to the point that when I did this is very important, I want females to know this. I went after I decided to get clean and come off of everything, I went to the gynecologist. This was probably the saddest thing I've experienced, so I think it's important to hear, and I asked for a female exam. I had been terrified to go. This is very common among female athletes because of the clitoral hypertrophy and the changes down there. So I went in and I explained to the PA that I, had some physical changes down there. And this is the physician's office that delivered my child. Okay. So they know I'm a female. So the woman came in, she did the vaginal exam, and she was extremely rude to me. She looked at me. I said, I just want to know where my levels should be hormonally. She looked at me. She said, I don't even know how to begin to help someone like you. Those were
Wow.
her exact words to me, as if I was transgender or, like I was some sort of foreign thing that she had never experienced.
Wow.
And that's just the reality.
It seems like there's just this huge gap between all the risks and all the things that you've gone through and your reward. What reward did you have from utilizing the PEDs? I mean, any major title wins, pro wins, millions of dollars in sponsorship money?
Not at all. So I actually only made it to nationals twice. Even though so from the jump, I've always won national qualifiers, but I still didn't feel like I was ready. I had been to nationals as an audience, as a member of the audience, and seen the level of competitor. So I knew that the level of drugs was twice what I was doing. So I was very hesitant at first, even though I was winning national qualifiers. And at the amateur level, I was doing great. I knew standing toe to toe at the national stage, I had to take my drug use up. So my very first nationals that I went to was in women's physique. Some of the competitors outweighed me by almost 40 pounds. And there were two transgenders that I had to compete against. And just to say, they were very large, right? And they had a male structure. So when someone outweighs you by 50 pounds, that's apples to oranges on stage. Okay. To each his own. It's just, I'm just stating what happened. And that was soul crushing. I came off of the stage. I had trained for an entire year for that show. Came off the stage, and my husband looked at me and he said, "Here's where you decide what you're willing to do." And that wasn't him encouraging me to do anything. That was him saying, "I think it's time that you look at this and decide exactly what you're willing to give up." And I looked at him, I said, "I can tell you what I'm not willing to do." And I didn't even go back on stage. I put my shoes on and I left the venue. I then went on to hire a coach for figure because I had never posed in heels before. I did not start in bikini. I started in bodybuilding.
Mhm.
So I didn't know how to walk in heels or pose in heels. So I hired a figure coach. And very first show, I wasn't even expecting to do well because I could barely walk. But very first show, just because of the size difference, because I had started in bodybuilding and women's physique, I won that as a national qualifier very first time on stage. And he said, "We're getting ready for nationals." So I spent the rest of the year getting ready for Universe. And when I went to Universe, first call outs, I was top three. And I knew I was, by this point, had developed AFib, which is, if you don't know what that is, that's a tachycardic heart condition where my heart will go to 220 beats a minute. I have to immediately be hospitalized and put on a drug to normalize my heart rhythm.
Wow.
I knew when I stepped off that stage with a third place, and you had to have second place to get your pro card. So I got 1 point for my pro card. I knew there was nothing more I could give. Like I was done. I just like you can only take it so, like that's when you really have to decide, are you willing to die? Uh, Um and I'm not. So
So with all the years that you spent in the sport, I know you probably met hundreds and hundreds of other competitors that you become friends with. Is your situation more the norm, or is it more the norm to take your PEDs, get your pro card, go on to pro shows, and get contracts out the yin yang and make millions of dollars and be this
hmm,
famous entity in the sport?
okay. So I'm not gonna name any names here, but I am gonna say this. Every female that I worked with was at least top six in the Olympia. Out of those females, out of those coaches that I hired, most of them have debilitating mental illnesses. One of them has had a thyroidectomy, has had her entire thyroid removed, and has had to have her breast implants removed. Um, she has not stepped back on stage since. The other one has tried to get ready for the Olympia quite a few times, and she keeps having to pull out because of mental health. I have yet to meet a female that has not experienced, when I say extreme loss and extreme health, you know, problems, there's all of us. There's Cedric McMillan was at the Olympia literally the day I got married, and my husband and I spent the rest of the day with him at the expo. He's now dead. You know, CJ, the show that I won in figure, the very first time I did figure, she was the one backstage fixing my suit. Cynthia James. She's fixing my suit. A year later, she's dead. Uh, John Meadows, who I idolized. I thought he was one of the best coaches and just most well-informed and educated individuals that I've ever met in training. He's now dead. The list just goes on and on.
I know what you mean. So far this year, and as we record this, it's the final day of January. I know of 4 bodybuilders, male and female, all under the age of 45, who have died of sudden causes. I think all death is sad. I think the loss of one is tragic. But I believe it was Stalin said that one person dies, it's a tragedy, millions dies, it's statistic. It almost seems like death and serious health implications in bodybuilding has just become the statistic, and people just like let it roll and let the numbers roll. And there's always an outpouring of sadness, but there doesn't seem to be any accountability. It doesn't seem to be that there are many people like yourself that are not only standing up and saying, I'm done, but also trying to advocate to the ignorant, because I think a lot of people who get into PEDs are not doing it out of anything else other than ignorance. They don't realize that all that health implications is real, or they go to the wrong person, they get the wrong information or whatever. But I think that you standing up and trying to break through the ignorance and try to make it no longer a statistic, but show people the tragedy that it is brave. And
I just thank you for reaching out as well, because bodybuilding is that. It's to build the body, right? And I naively went into this sport thinking that that's what we were doing, and never did it dawn on me, or I looked at these images of these bodybuilders and I thought, that's got to be the image of perfection. That's got to be this image of health, right? That's the epitome. That's the goal. And that's, I loved a question that you proposed to me. You were asking about the psychological effects, not just the viralization. When you have this thought in your mind and this idea in your mind of what bodybuilding is, it's an image, right? When
Mhm,
that image does not match how you feel inside, when you know that inside you are dying, but on the outside you are trying to epitomize health and epitomize bodybuilding, and you come out of it and you decide, I'm not going to do these drugs anymore. Now you have to deal with these psychological images in your mind of what you're supposed to look like, the hardness that you're supposed to feel, the low body fat that you're supposed to be at, the standard that everyone has held you to.
mhm,
And then when your body starts to change, and as a female, you start to soften and you start to have a little bit of body fat where you're supposed to have it, and your estrogen levels are normalized, and you mental health wise are in a good place, the image outside is now completely shifted for you. And now what you think is normal is no longer normal. So being soft makes you feel completely illegitimate as a bodybuilder, because the image that is commercialized is a drugged image that's
mhm,
body destroying. And that's where we get messed up. Is now every day I'll see fat in places that shouldn't be there. Or, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's a little bit of body fat on my thigh or whatever, which is normal for normal healthy hormone levels. But in my mind, that shouldn't be there. So I battle every day with not taking a fat burner, not taking clenbuterol, not taking an anti-estrogen, not, going back to the use of these drugs, because now the world looks at me and they saw me this way over here, and I'm a bodybuilder, I'm a coach, I'm a trainer, and all this kind of stuff. And that's now the expectation of what I'm supposed to look like. God forbid I look normal. So that's a that's huge. That's career ending because people don't want to hire you when you look normal. And now my lab work is beautiful and my heart functions properly and I am healthy and my performance is through the roof. And because someone saw me over here, all they can talk about is what I used to be.
Right. Right.
That's heartbreaking.
It's it's a different version of a legacy that you leave. And
For sure.
here's where I want to go with that. You had a legacy on the stage, but is that legacy who you are as a person or is that lasting? No, it's fleeting. It's gone. What you are creating now for yourself and for those around you is your legacy. Because before you were just a shiny bauble on a stage. That's fleeting.
Yes.
That's not real. What you are doing now is showing character and integrity, and you are building a new lasting legacy of somebody that is building something to help other people foundationally. You're going to make people better. You're going to make people well. You're going to increase awareness. You are now creating a legacy that will hopefully save lives instead of just being something to look at. So you have an, now that brings me to my last question. What was your view of the natural bodybuilding world and natural bodybuilding organizations when you first started competing and got involved in PED use to now? Has there been a change in your view of natural bodybuilding federations?
So I will say this because I know the viewpoint from other perspectives. I know the viewpoint from other people. My viewpoint's very different though, because I actually always, it was like, when you're a kid and you write down what you want to be, I can remember literally writing down in my journal, I want to be the greatest natural bodybuilder of all time. So natural bodybuilding was actually always the epitome of what I felt I stood for and what I always wanted. When I couldn't compete in the natural organizations and I had to make that choice to go into the drugged organizations, it was not an easy one. That wasn't a choice that I would have made. I would have been natural the rest of my life and loved it because I have more, and I say this, and I don't mean to step on any toes when I say this. I have more respect for natural athletes. I think there's a higher level of integrity with natural athletes. I think that because I know how hard it is to compete and how hard it is to achieve those body fat levels and how hard it is to juggle that with everyday life, doing it without drugs is even harder. I'm not saying that people who do drugs don't work hard, but I'm saying that the precision that it takes to be a natural bodybuilder, a true natural bodybuilder without the use of any diuretics, any drugs, anything like that requires such a respect for human physiology and such a respect for discipline and consistency. And there is no backup. There is no, you know, well, I'm going to take this human growth hormone or I'm going to miss this meal because I'm anabolic still because I have androgens running through my system. There's no physiological backup. There is no, you have nothing in your pocket. You must do it correctly. And I have such a level of respect for that. And I always have. I think even now, I have a greater level of respect than I did before. I think that everyone genuinely, if they were honest with themselves, feels the same way that I do. I think they won't say it, because they probably are in the same boat that I was in, where I made a choice that I didn't even realize was a wrong one out of the gate. I wasn't educated. I did not have informed consent on the choices that I was making. I was not aware that if I took a certain substance, this would disqualify me from being able to compete naturally. And so when I went into the drug organizations, I think it was just like an acceptance that, well, I wish I could have done it naturally. And so I think the viewpoints when you get the eye rolls and things like that, when it comes to people hearing someone say that they're natural, what they believe is that you're not natural because they don't believe it can be done without drugs.
We hear
And the
that all the time
second
with our
thing,
youth.
all the time,
Mhm.
I've seen it done without drugs and I've done it without drugs. That's why I can say I know it's harder. That's why I can say I have a higher level of integrity for it, because I know what it took for me to step on stage and win a national qualifier with no drugs, and I know what it took to win it with drugs, and it was exponentially harder without. I mean, my viewpoints on that, I'm not just saying that as a, poke at any organization. I'm saying that as an athlete who did it. And I can tell you hands down, it's harder to do it natural. It requires a level of discipline most people do not have. Genetically, if you're not a superhuman, like you're not have great genetics, a lot of people go to the drug organizations out of the gate because they cannot even think that it's fathomable to get to the level of body fat needed to step on stage and be competitive. And so most of them choose the drug route because they'll I get this all the time. But I've done everything I could possibly do without drugs, and I just can't get the rest of this body fat. And I'm like, well, maybe you're just not digging deep enough. Maybe there's metabolic damage. Maybe that you've been a chronic undereater and you're trying to do it too fast and you don't want to slow down. Right? You don't want to heal your body first and get your body set up in a correct metabolic profile before starting prep. These are all things that athletes need to be educated about, that they're undereducated about, and they rush in and they want it right now.
Yes.
And anything worth having has to be earned.
Yes,
That's where I would leave that.
exactly. Well, you are welcome to any OCB show that I am ever around or at any time. And I appreciate your vulnerability and the courage that it took for you to come on and to discuss these topics. And I just want to thank you again for helping educate our audience.
Thank you.
And nothing is worth dying for. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want everybody to realize that there are some fine lines that you shouldn't cross for success. That sometimes the drive and determination will get you to your goal without the shortcuts, and that nothing is worth risking your health and taking years off of your longevity.
And I would just like to note that's before you make a dime. That's before you sign with an apparel company. That's before you even step on a national stage.
Absolutely. Kristen, thank you again. It's been my honor to have you on the OCB Natural Edge.
Thank you so much.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to zoom out and talk about a harder truth. There's something called the skunk cost focus. This is when you get so wrapped up in a bad decision that you've made that you feel that there's no way out. It creates a toxic lie. This lie could be a career path, it could be a relationship, it could be any circumstance that you're in. And the lie to yourself becomes, I'm never going to get out of this, and this is just the way that it is. And there's no honor in following a mistake to the grave. It takes a lot of integrity to make a U-turn. It takes a lot of integrity to do what Kristen did and to stop the PED use, to make a major decision in her life that had a lot of impact and repercussions. But you know what? She's walking a better path now. she's in a better place, and she's become a better human being. It takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to go through the turbulence that change makes. But you need to own the truth. You need to have pride and dismantle the lie and not feel that you're trapped by a bad choice. Your history is not your heartbeat, and you are not a passenger in your life. You have the ability to choose. So choose now, right now. Go through the fire of change. No matter what that circumstance is that's blocking your life, no matter what it is that's creating the angst within you, make the decision to make the change. It's a long, hard path, but it's the only path worth taking. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay hungry, stay humble, stay natural. Until we meet again, Sully out.